The Last Guardian has been in development for what seems like forever, because, in gaming terms, a decade pretty much is forever. What's undoubtedly got it this far in the first place is the fact that it's the spiritual successor to PlayStation 2 classics Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. You play in the shoes, or rather lack of shoes, of a tattooed young man whose idea of getting dressed is raiding his parents' towel cupboard. While most people we know have experience of waking up with no memory next to an oversized hound, our young protagonist takes this to a literal extreme, gaining consciousness as he does in a cave next to a wounded and chained feathery cat-dog thing called Trico. After doing the whole taking the thorn out of the lion's paw gig, Trico becomes your faithful companion throughout the remainder of the game. As The Last Guardian is, at heart, a puzzle platformer, Trico contributes to the journey as any other house-sized beast would do, by knocking down bits of scenery to make paths and bridges, leaping across huge chasms whilst you ride bareback, and attempting to catch you every time you misjudge a jump, which, by the way, will be quite frequently. Trico is also instrumental to the in-game combat, as your mere presence in this mystical crumbling ruin is enough to upset the paranormal locals. Unlike the protagonists in Ico and Shadow of the Colossus, Tattooed Towelboy is a bit crap in a fight, so your task instead will be to lead any threats into the path of your walking piñata mate, so that he can tear them limb from limb and then look guilty about it afterwards. The Last Guardian may not look particularly impressive at a glance, particularly in still screenshots, but something that becomes apparent very quickly when you actually sit down and play it is how enormously impressive the animation is. Towelboy is reasonably agile and can jump around and climb the ruins around him. This is represented in game with what feels like a vast pool of possible reactions to his surroundings, and indeed to Trico himself. If you were impressed by the stunning motion capture in the Uncharted series, then you're in for a treat, as The Last Guardian surpasses it. Trico is also animated almost to perfection, displaying an incredible range of actions and reactions to the environments around him, and to the commands that you give him. It's clear that the development team behind this have gone to great lengths to study the ways in which domestic pets react to their owners, and this has been replicated beautifully here. Trico, after all, doesn't come across as a mindless automaton that you can command to carry out your bidding. He requires managing. If you want Trico to jump from one area to another, for example, it genuinely feels like you're having to coax and guide him rather than just triggering a rote piece of AI. Similarly, when Trico gets involved in combat, you have to follow this up by calming him down and pulling spears out of his arse. It's touches such as this that underpin the very heart of what the game offers, namely the relationship between you and Trico. Of course, it also helps that the level design is as expansive and impressive as it was in Ico. When most people think of that game, they tend to remember the feeling that travelling through its isolated, echoey and ancient looking world gave them, and it's no small praise to observe that The Last Guardian goes some way towards replicating that feeling. This is helped along by a similarly great soundtrack and enormously atmospheric sound design that together imbue a tremendous sense of place. Graphically speaking, the textures do admittedly look a little ugly. After all, this was a game that was originally designed to run 2 console generations ago, when everything looked like crap. But the game world doesn't feel poorer as a result. In fact, we were frequently reminded of when we first played through the cavernous tombs and lost worlds of the original Tomb Raider back on the Sega Saturn. However, we suspect Tomb Raider actually ran a little bit better on the Saturn than The Last Guardian does on the PlayStation 4. Because yes, despite the fact that the game worlds were designed to be accommodated by far less powerful hardware, albeit hardware with a completely different architecture, The Last Guardian still feels like it was released too soon. The frame rate on the base PS4 can, and often does, drop alarmingly, to the point that we actually started to wonder how few frames per second a game would actually have to drop down to in order for Sony's so-called certification process to actually not approve its release. This is apparently less of a problem on the PS4 Pro, but are we really already at the point where Sony is saying to their 50 million early adopters, hey guys, do you want your games to run properly? Then get another job, work harder, and buy another console. The camera positioning can be an absolute nightmare. This is often the case when you're in narrower areas of the game, and the camera responds to this with an extreme close-up that makes it impossible to see what you're doing. This would be a problem in most games, but in a puzzle platformer that relies on you being able to examine and judge your environment, it's actually a pretty serious design flaw. And just in case that's not frustrating enough for you, there's the whole issue of herding Trico and getting him to do what you want when you want him to do it. Yes, you too can find out what it's like to be the slightly slow kid you knew at school who told everyone he could make his cat do tricks. Now, some masochists have attempted to justify this as being realistic, because yeah, we all want to know what it's really like to try and persuade a dim bird thing to be more like the Khaleesi's dragon from Game of Thrones, but no, that's not the case. It's not art, it's just ropey AI. And that's a real shame, because with yet another year in development to fix the nonsense with the camera, the AI that only fires when it feels like it, the technical issues with the game engine, and the illogical control scheme, The Last Guardian could have been a worthy successor to its mighty predecessors, or even a celebration of PS2 era game design sensibilities. Instead, it ends up feeling more like a relic. It's still worth playing, particularly if you prepare yourself for the frustration beforehand, and we suspect it's still something we'll remember in years to come, albeit not with the same fondness as the likes of Ico. As it stands though, it's merely a good but flawed reminder of what we used to so often see when a designer's aspirations were hamstrung by limited hardware and dodgy coding. As such, The Last Guardian nets itself a score of 70%.